meeting of the Science to order. Note that the department has access. Everyone remember that the meeting is being recorded. Ms. Taylor, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Would you please take a roll call, please, confirm that there is a quorum present?
Okay. Colonel DeBoard,
I'm here.
Director Dion,
Present.
Dr. Edinburgh, Senator Edwards.
Here. Can they hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Dr. Gormley,
Here.
Mr. Hayes,
Here.
Delegate Herring, Kristen Howard,
Here.
Caroline Jurin,
Carolyn, can you unmute yourself?
I'm here. Sorry, not unmuted.
thank you. Mr. Lett,
Present.
Ms. McKeechin, Dr. Edinburgh, I see that you're here. Thank you.
Present.
Mr. Myers?
Here.
Okay. Colonel Settle?
I'm here.
Thank you. Mr. Shaw?
Present.
Ms. Wood?
I'm here.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you so much. We're going to ask everyone to remember to mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Please helpful for us all, okay? And I'll also remind, can everybody hear me first of all? Can you hear me? I'm assuming that you can. If for some reason you can't hear, unmute and just say, I can't hear you, okay? I want to remind everyone that when you speak, that you should state your name beforehand, so Ms. Taylor has that information for the purposes of the minutes, okay? Our first order of business is the adoption of the agenda. Ms. Taylor sent out a link yesterday to a revised agenda. Are there any suggested changes or revisions in the draft agenda? Not hearing any objections, is there a motion that we adopt the draft agenda?
Carl Burrows, so moved.
Is there a second?
Les Edinburgh, second.
Ms. Taylor, all in favor?
Can I hear who made the motion first?
Beg your pardon?
Who made the motion first?
Carl Hayde.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm going to start with the roll. Colonel DeBoard,
Yes.
Director Dion,
Yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Aye.
Senator Edwards,
Aye.
Dr. Gormley,
Yes.
Mr. Hayde,
Aye.
Ms. Howard,
Aye.
Ms. Jurin,
Aye.
Mr. Lett,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Colonel Settle,
Aye.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Ms. Wood,
Yes.
the motion passes.
All right, the agenda is adopted. The next item of business is the draft minutes of the June 29th, 20 meeting. Ms. Taylor also sent me a link yesterday to the revised draft minutes. Are there any proposed changes to the draft minutes? There being none, ask for a motion to approve the draft minutes. Is there such a
Move
motion?
to approve. Second.
There's a second. Would you please take a roll call vote, please? Ms. Taylor?
Yes, I'm here. Can I hear who made the motion and who seconded it, please?
Yes, we need to make sure that we have the names, okay? Who made the motion? The person who made the motion was?
Gormley.
And the second? Who seconded the motion? We need the name of the party who seconded the motion.
This is Colonel DeBoard. I'll second it now if nobody speaks up.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Colonel DeBoard,
Yes.
Director Dion,
Yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Aye.
Senator Edwards,
Aye.
Gormley,
Yes.
Mr. Hayde,
Aye.
Ms. Howard,
Aye.
Ms. Trent,
Aye.
Mr. Leck,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Colonel Settle,
Aye.
Mr. Shaw,
Aye.
Ms. Wood.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Minutes have been approved. Thank you so much. The next order of business is going to be DFS Director's Report from Director Jackson.
All right, good morning. I'm going to try and pull up my slides. All right, can anyone confirm whether my slides are visible?
Yes.
Visible.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you all for joining us on this electronic meeting. And I was not able to attend the meeting in late July, but thank you so much for being very flexible in having a very short timeline called meeting and attending. That was very helpful to get those regulations acted upon. So I just am going to give, it's been a while since the board has heard from us. And so I'm just going to go through some of the things that have been going on in the department so that you have an update. Just for anyone who is needing the PowerPoint, it is available on our website. If you go under at www.dfs.virginia.gov, and if you go to About DFS, and then go to the Forensic Science Board under Meetings and Meeting Minutes, they are posted. So our biggest changes that have happened that we have been working on, obviously, are our response to the pandemic. And so I just kind of wanted to go through some of the things that we have done as an agency to be able to continue to provide the services to the criminal justice community during this time. So overall, we have been maintaining our normal business hours for evidence receiving. We have had lunch hour closure so that we could do some disinfecting during that time, and allow evidence to be put away and so forth during that time to start afresh in the afternoon. Our forensic scientists have been, as we are essential employees, our forensic scientists have been working in the laboratory. We are one of the agencies where when everyone is told to telework, we have a lot of our work that is not able to be performed at home. And so therefore the forensic scientists have been having to come into the lab, and in order to reduce the population at any one time, they have staggered their work schedules, which has been helpful in population control, as well as allowing people to work with their spouse on childcare and some of the other issues, that have kind of come up during this pandemic. We have allowed the scientists in most sections to telework 1 day a week, to where they can do some paperwork and other activities through the network at home. Because of their staggered schedules, it is harder probably to find them during the day if you are a customer trying to reach them. And so we sent out a email communication list with the contact information of all of our scientific staff and some of our administrative staff as well, so that they could be reached hopefully via email at any time. We have been utilizing video testimony a little more than normal, although we have been testifying a lot less than normal because of the judicial emergency that was declared by the Supreme Court. Obviously, there have not been any jury trials, and it's only been recently that some of the DUID testimony and such has resumed. All of our laboratories do have that video testimony capability, and so we are very excited to try it whenever anyone has offered that possibility. In evidence receiving in particular, we have asked people to mail in any evidence that is possible to mail in, if that's feasible. We are requiring face masks for customers coming in and also for our staff who are interacting with customers. We are asking for law enforcement to make an appointment so that we can make sure that the population in the evidence receiving area is sufficiently low at any one time. And we're also asking for folks to either email or fax in scans of the requests prior to that appointment, so that all of the information can be entered into our computer system before the law enforcement arrives. So just trying to minimize the amount of time that people are spending at the laboratory. In breath alcohol, obviously you think about breath alcohol and the fact that it's the pandemic is a respiratory transmitted disease, and that to take a breath sample you have to blow, and that seems distressing. So we did receive guidance from the VOS, which is the equivalent, the Virginia equivalent to OSHA, on some additional safety guidelines that we should pass out to all of our operators. And so those are mandatory measures, and we sent those out at the beginning of April. Our instruments, if they are not recertified, every 6 months, their certification will expire and they will be locked so that no additional breath tests can be run if they are out of that certification period. So we're happy to say that during this time when we had minimal travel, we didn't have any instruments that did get locked down like that due to an expired certification. We are back to going to on-site to be able to switch out with certified instruments all over the state at this point. There has been a reduction in tests that have been conducted around the state. Obviously, there's also probably a reduction in traffic in general. Certainly when I drive to work, it's much easier to get there these days than a normal time period. But you can see at the bottom the reduction in tests that have been run on the evidential ECIR2 instruments since March. In January and February, those numbers were very similar to 2019. We also had to make some changes to the training courses that we offer. We have over 6,000 trained breath alcohol operators, and they have to be recertified every 2 years. And we have new folks who are brought on board all the time. And so we did have to cancel all of our in-person classes. Luckily for those recertifications, we had previously put an option online to provide for remote if you met certain criteria for how recently you have performed a breath test. And so we've had a larger number of people that have been utilizing that online option, and we just resumed our first in-person initial class on June 22nd at a lower class size, smaller class size, and with some additional, we had 10 in that class, and some additional safety precautions being taken. For our forensic training, we did cancel the 101st session for the Forensic Science Academy, and do plan to resume with what was then the 102nd later in the fall. We did implement some web-based training, which we had never done before for forensic training. We provided training in photography and that type of thing, and we have actually gotten good critiques from that because it's structured in such a way that there is content provided and then exercises to be done offline, and then uploading the results of those exercises and coming back together as a class and having discussions about them. And so with the success of that, we do think that it's a great opportunity to add that into our repertoire, even if we, as we continue to do the in-person classes, which could be very helpful for, law enforcement that are in more far-flung areas of Virginia to minimize travel. So they did resume and had an in-person class on July 6th. The attorney training that we have provided for the last 2 years, if you remember, those were based on DNA testing. And then last year, we also added DUI and DUID. We have canceled those for 2020 due to the pandemic. The agency did apply for and receive funding from the CARES Act to reimburse the agency for expenses that were used or paid for relating to the pandemic. We received $34,374. Most of that is to cover things that we had already spent. You can see just over 31,000 was for that. That included things like additional PPE that was additional to what we normally buy for analysis and lab work, and additional hand sanitizer, and also the sanitization of laboratories when we have had a positive test. Let's see. I do want to say congratulations to the 100th class of the Forensic Science Academy. We had hoped in April, when they were scheduled to graduate, to have a grand celebration, as the 100th class seems particularly momentous. But here's their picture of them socially distanced, as they had a very low-key graduation. They actually worked very hard to finish a week early, where they kind of put in more hours than normal to get done early so that they could return to their families as travel was being restricted. I wanted to give an update about our capital project that we are moving forward with for replacing the central laboratory facility. For those of you that are new members, we've actually been working on this project since 2013. trying to move forward with a new building. We're initially trying to just renovate and expand the building on our current site, but it became apparent that that was going to be far more expensive and problematic than building a new facility. So we purchased land up in Hanover in December of 2019. And you can see the red dot is showing where that is, which is located just off of, it's one exit on 295 off of I-95, so that it should be very convenient for law enforcement who are coming to deliver evidence, as well as folks who are coming for the multiple training courses, which we hold in our Richmond facility. So we're currently in the design phase. We are just starting to get some drawings, and so it's very exciting, even though you can see from the timeline that we still have quite a ways to go. The photo there, or the rendering, is just one potential building design that they are working on. I think that the shape of it will be fairly similar to what you see there. In the photo, the part of the building on the left here would have the entire first floor would be for the OCME, the medical examiner, for their morgue and so forth. The second floor would be for all of the training facilities, and the third floor would be for both DFS and medical examiner statewide offices. Over on the right side would be 3 floors of the DFS central laboratory with evidence receiving and all of the laboratory spaces. So just an update on our accreditation. We are accredited by ANAB for forensic testing and also forensic calibration. And those are national standards that we are held to in that forensic category. So we did just complete our surveillance assessment. Normally this would have been where assessors or auditors came on site to review certain areas of our testing. It's not a full assessment, but they select certain areas within the accreditation requirements to verify. Because of the travel restrictions that were in place in May, we had an online kind of pseudo on-site assessment where we had to upload all of our records and so forth onto a document sharing site. And we also, they are required to witness some of the activities in the lab. And so we did that by a combination of taking videos and of having, FaceTime types of active video conversations. So our accreditation does expire in 2022, which is when we will have to go through another full assessment. We have put together a new customer working group, and we did this kind of in consultation with the Commonwealth Attorneys Services Council. And generally this customer working group would be a combination of attorneys and law enforcement who represent different types of customers, like towns and cities and sheriffs and police and that type of thing, so that we could, when we have questions about where to go with particular policy decisions on how to handle certain types of evidence or certain types of testing or triaging, that we have a group that we can take those questions to get feedback. And so we had our first meeting on May 14th, and it was held virtually. It was rescheduled from the in-person meeting that was scheduled prior to that was canceled due to travel restrictions. But at that meeting, we reviewed all of our submission policies where we limit testing in some way to receive feedback. And so we hope to have this group meet whenever there is something significant to discuss, or at least once a year. The perk tracking system is online. It has been online for a little while now, but its use became mandatory when the delayed legislation from the 2019 session went into effect on July 1st, 2020. And so this perk tracking system is a web-based system, and it tracks the status of perks. Perks are the sexual assault kits in Virginia. It stands for Physical Evidence Recovery Kit. And all of the victim perks and perks that are collected at the medical examiner's office are tracked. And so there are different user groups for who can put information in this. It doesn't contain any personal identifying information for a survivor, a suspect, or any of that. It only tracks the number on the kit, which is in a barcode, and also where that kit is currently located. It will allow victims and survivors to be able to see when testing, when the kit has been submitted to the laboratory, and also when the laboratory testing is completed, so that they know to contact law enforcement for that information. So in order to have access to this system, you have to go through about an hour of training. Right now, as of July 13th, 177 law enforcement agencies have received that training and have system access. We are working to continue reaching out, and we have worked with the Sheriff's Association and Police Association to be able to help get some support in getting that information out about obtaining the training. So that perk legislation that went into effect back in 2016 requires that law enforcement agencies submit a perk to DFS for testing within 60 days of receipt within the law enforcement agency. There are only 5 exceptions to when a kit has to be submitted. One is if that kit is anonymous, meaning that it has not been reported to law enforcement. Those are submitted to the Department of Consolidated Laboratories, where they are maintained. And survivors can still receive information about those kits when they go to the anonymous storage, and it has information about how they can request that kit to continue to be stored, and how to report it to law enforcement if they change their mind. Another reason is if that kit is collected as part of a routine death investigation, but then there's consensus that there was really no sexual assault, and therefore analysis is not warranted. It's an exception if the kit is collected for an out-of-state offense, since that's probably going to be investigated somewhere else. And if the investigation needs to be transferred to another law enforcement agency, so that it would be the secondary law enforcement agency that would then have the responsibility of submitting it, and not the first. And then also if the kit is, upon investigation, is determined not to be related to a criminal offense, that would also not have to be submitted. So that means that any other kit has to be submitted, whether the victim or survivor is wanting to participate in the investigation, or any of those kind of other reasons why previously a kit may not have been submitted. Those are now required to be submitted to DFS. So if I just have the information here, if you know of an agency or a hospital that needs to have training or access, the person to contact is our coordinator for this project, and her contact information is on the slide. All right. right, we have sent out a couple of policy notices since we last met. The first is we sent out a policy notice for if evidence is submitted to the department in a paint can. Those are normally used to package evidence in fire debris or arson type cases. And so if those are used, we need to now have a control paint can or an empty paint can so that we can do the test on that empty paint can to show that there is nothing present in that can from the manufacturing of the can. So that went out at the beginning of June. And then we've also sent out a couple of policy notices relating to the analysis of marijuana. And so I wanted to start by talking briefly about some of the marijuana legislation that has gone into effect, which then prompted us to put out the different policy notices. So two bills related to marijuana in particular were specifically affected the Department of Forensic Science. The first was our agency bill, which was carried by Senator Survell, and that changed the THC definition, or tetrahydrocannabinol definition, to clarify that when we're doing these quantitative analyses to differentiate between marijuana and industrial hemp, that the way we do that is using a post-decarboxylation test method, which is the same as the method that is designated in the federal hemp legislation. And so that was just kind of to clarify in Virginia law that would be handled as was in the federal Farm Bill. Also, House Bill 972 and Senate Bill 2 were the bills that decriminalized marijuana for simple possession charges. It changed for adults, not for juveniles, and it now carries a civil penalty of $25. And there's a rebuttable presumption that less than 1 ounce of plant material is for personal use. The other thing that that bill did was eliminate hash oil, which is an extract from plant material marijuana containing at least 12% THC from Schedule 1. And so that affects us because we were doing a lot of testing on different oils and liquids and preparations to determine whether or not they had that concentration of THC greater than 12%. And so those did affect the department. And so we sent out two different notices. The first, back in January, we implemented our semi-quantitative method that allows us to differentiate for the most part between industrial hemp and marijuana. And so we sent out a memo that that explained about that method and the fact that we were going to be using that method on all plant material samples. And because Duquesnoy-Levine field test, which is the one that had been approved for marijuana analysis in regulations, could not differentiate between industrial hemp and marijuana, we made it so that it was no longer required to have a court order to send in those simple possession of marijuana cases, so that we could do that if needed for court. After July 1st, when those simple possession cases became a civil penalty, we reinstituted that policy where a court order will be required to do analysis in those simple possession of marijuana cases. That, of course, is not true if the defendant is a juvenile, since those are still criminal charges. So currently, just to give you an update of where we are on being able to test marijuana products and differentiate them from industrial hemp, we do have that semi-quantitative method online to identify marijuana in plant material. The method has been validated for oil and different extract preparations and will be online very shortly. But we do not have a method to differentiate hemp-derived marijuana or hemp-derived or marijuana-derived edibles or residues. So therefore, we are asking that law enforcement do not submit residues because there's not enough sample there to do the test, to do that differentiation. And in edibles also, we do not have a method online. Controlled substances in general, this has been an area that we have been working very hard to increase our capacity and decrease our turnaround times so that the results we're getting to customers more quickly. And we have a lot of support in that. We had from the General Assembly and from the administration getting us 12 additional positions a couple of years ago when we saw that the number of submissions were increasing and continuing to increase, mostly due to the opioid epidemic. And then, that's kind of expanded to different types of drugs other than opioids as well. But we do have 61 FTEs now that are scientists that are able to do caseworks. And you can see that quite a lot of those scientists that have been in training have now completed their training and are able to do casework, which is very helpful in getting control of our backlog. We had also been outsourcing one and two item cases to the outsourcing lab, which was NMS Labs up in Pennsylvania. Over the course of the project, we have sent over 4,000 cases to them. And those cases, when they were sent, their turnaround times were about 21 days on average, which was great. We did not send any cases to them in May, starting in May. And so, and I'll kind of explain that a little bit more as we look at some statistics. We did, one of our duties is to look at compounds that we see that are novel psychoactive substances that are being abused, and therefore we're seeing them in the laboratory. And those fall into several categories: research chemicals, the cannabimimetics, which early on those were called synthetic marijuana, but now this is a more appropriate name for them. And then synthetic opioids, some of which are much more lethal than fentanyl itself. And so we made a recommendation of 11 compounds in January to the Board of Pharmacy for their consideration to consider whether or not those should be scheduled in an expedited manner through their regulatory process. They did vote to approve these compounds at their main meeting, and they're pending final approval. We generally send them recommendations on a quarterly basis. We have received over the past several years, 4 years, money from a couple of different sources. First, from the District Attorney of New York, and now through the NIJ SACI program to have kits, sexual assault kits or PERTs tested that were never submitted to the laboratory prior to the PERT legislation going into effect in 2016. And so this last grant that we are working through to get those tested, all of the kits that were identified in the Office of the Attorney General inventory, and that's from 2014 to 2016. All of those that were identified in the inventory that can be sent to the contract lab have been sent to the contract lab, and all of the testing has been complete of those cases. And so the only thing that remains is that we still have a few cases left where our examiners have to review that data that comes from the outsourced lab, Bodie Technology, and upload any profiles into the national database, CODIS, for searching. And so we have a few of those left, but the project is, the testing part of the project is complete. One other thing that this grant does cover is the salary and benefits of our perk tracking system coordinator. And we have put in for that again. This is obviously through the Attorney General's office is the main recipient of this grant, and we are a subrecipient. And so hopefully we will be awarded this additional funds to continue having that perk tracking system coordinator through 2022, since their main job will be to support all of the users of the system, and also to look at compliance and provide information to you, the Forensic Science Board, on compliance with the PERC legislation, since that is something that in the Code of Virginia, it says that the Forensic Sciences Board has to report on each November in their annual report. And so Attorney General Herring did have a press event just last week with Debbie Smith, who Debbie Smith was actually, for those of you who don't know, has been a big advocate with sexual assault, kit testing, and getting funding to laboratories for being able to do testing. But she was actually the fourth, her sexual assault was solved by the fourth DNA hit ever received in Virginia. So it was great that she could be there. In toxicology, we have a lot of method development and training going on in that. We have purchased these automatic liquid handling systems, which is what is in the picture on the left. They look really fancy, and really what they are sample handling robots to allow for sample preparation to be done in a hands-off way, to allow examiners and scientists to do other things while the samples are being prepared by the robot. And so those are very close to being implemented for our opioid and cocaine and fentanyl methods, so that those can hopefully be done in a more streamlined fashion, since quite a lot of samples are tested for those compounds these days, both for the medical examiner and for drivers. We do have a couple of folks that are in the hiring process and in training, and I just have that information there for you. In trace evidence, I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on some changes that are coming to report wording in trace evidence cases. So trace evidence cases where this type of wording will be present are things like fiber examinations, glass, paint, anything where you're comparing two types of materials. And really what we're doing is we're adding some information to the report to give more information about the significance of when we say that there are similarities between a known item. And so you'll have a better understanding of the strength of the conclusion. And the example that our chemistry program manager gave yesterday to the scientific advisory committee is that if you had a blue cotton fiber that was found at a crime scene, that could be from genes, which, you know, genes are something that pretty much everyone has. And so that type of fiber might be less discriminating than a more rare type of fiber. And so the language will be added to the certificates. The black information is what's currently on the certificate, where it tells you what methods they used and what are the results and the conclusions. And the things that will be added are language to kind of describe what the level is of that association and why that was chosen. And any additional information, like if there are multiple conclusions and if you add those together, it is more meaningful, that would be described and why. And then most importantly, I think when you have a level of association is that all reports will then contain a key, the levels that could have been selected, so you can see where on that continuum the conclusion resides. So that if you have, these are not the right words, but if you have something like most and best, and you might not know which one is the highest. And so putting that key on the report, I think, is important. In latent prints, we do have both latent prints and firearms entry marks are sections where we do have more positions that are either in the hiring process or in the training process. And you can see in our statistics, our case completion statistics and our backlogs, that is actually, excuse me, making our backlogs go up in some instances. And so we have 5 examiners right now that are either in training or are in the hiring process for latent prints. Latent prints is one of the only sections that their analysis has some at-home teleworking capability, and that is because they're doing their on-screen comparisons, and there's an example of that in the picture where they can, with VPN connections, go into the server and do those comparisons and do that marking on the server, just like if they were in the office. And so they have had some increased opportunities for telework. With firearms, as I was saying, they have several positions that are again, 5 positions that are in some sort of non-production mode. We have just recently provided our current turnaround times for NIBIN to the ATF as they have those new minimum required operating standards, which include standards for how quick our turnaround times need to be. And so we have just reported those numbers to ATF for their review. Most of the turnaround times in each of those areas have improved based on some of the things that we have put in place, trying to work on those turnaround times. We are continuing to validate our 3D imaging equipment for firearms, and we've put in a grant proposal to try and purchase some additional equipment. Right now, we only have the 1 unit, which is in our Eastern laboratory. Digital and multimedia evidence. A good portion of the staff did participate in the Virginia Cybercrime Initiative Conference, which was kind of one of the last in-person conferences that occurred in March. And it was sponsored by Commonwealth Attorney Services Council. We had our supervisor provide a presentation about our capabilities, as well as give some examples of some interesting, odd cases that might not be, the normal cases. So that actually was great to have our folks be there and get the perspectives of the law enforcement and attorneys that were present to support, how they are providing service. We have increased our capacity in digital and multimedia evidence in that we are now fully staffed. And also we have put a couple of policies in place to limit some of the data retrieval that is done, so that if no time is given on the request, we are limiting our what we're retrieving from whatever device it is to 6 months prior to the offense date. And that has really helped in being able to turn around cases a little faster. In forensic biology, this is another area where there are a lot of method validation and new methods that are going online. YSTR testing is that DNA testing on the male DNA. It is very useful for sexual assault type investigations, because if the sample was taken from a female victim, the female DNA may overwhelm the smaller amount of male DNA that may be present. And so this YSTR testing allows for you to focus on the male DNA that may be present. And so we are utilizing this now as a screening tool for our DNA analysis. And so we have put the newer instruments online, which are the 3500s. And initially, we had only been doing this YSDR testing in 2 labs, and we're trying to move it into all 4 labs so that it can be part of the workflow of these sexual assault kits. We have now put it online in Western, and the to put this online will be our Eastern laboratory in Norfolk, and it should be online in July or August. We are also getting much closer to putting a new probabilistic modeling software online for the DNA statistics. This will help because more people will be able to do these statistics. Right now, in a lot of cases, if there is a mixture, you will get one report that is from the examiner that developed the profile, and then another report from the examiner has done the statistics. And so therefore, this will allow more of our reports to be done by just one examiner, which should help with throughput. And lastly, with our DNA data bank, we are moving, as I mentioned in our January meeting, we are moving to an electronic pre-log. And so I've heard Brad Jenkins, our program manager, mentioned that we were the first people in the United States state laboratory to have a DNA data bank and database for searching, and that's great, but it's time for us to move forward and have those records be electronic, which should help with a lot of name clarification and that type of thing with a typed in record, instead of having to read the handwriting of whoever took the sample. Moving on to our budget and current resources. We are currently in a hiring freeze that was put forward by the Chief of Staff for all executive branch agencies. There are exemptions to that hiring freeze if approved by the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security for positions directly related to public safety. So we do have position types that have been approved to continue to fill. Those are mostly the scientist positions and our evidence receiving positions. We were also asked to pledge savings for fiscal year 20 when there was, when it was known that a lot of funds were going to COVID-related expenses that had not been planned for, and the uncertainty of the revenues that were coming in. And so our agency did pledge $300,000, and you can see what those were from on the slide. So one of the things that we, that I had mentioned before was that we had not submitted any cases to the outsourcing lab for drug testing, and that was the biggest element of $100,000. So this is our agency budget in the budget that was signed, and I will just point out that it included 3 items that we had requested, but 2 of those items were unallocated by the governor before the budget was signed due to, again, the uncertainty of revenues. And so left in were the ability to use the grant funds and FTE for hiring this DNA research position is on a federal grant. Unallocated were our funding for 2 IT positions. IT is one of the areas that we have noted in our succession plan and risk evaluation that we are in need of some additional people. We do not have as strong of, not remembering the word I would like, but we have too many of our important critical pieces that only one person really knows how to do. We are spread too thin with only 3 IT people for our entire agency. And then lastly, we also had unallocated the money that we had asked for and received for additional maintenance costs for new lab equipment, especially some of the new toxicology equipment we have that has that is very expensive and has high maintenance fees. All right, the next slides are, I'm just gonna quickly, I have a list here of the grants that we currently have in place that this board has seen multiple times and has approved. I'm going to move on to slide 37. We have had since January quite a few grants that we have sent descriptions to the chair and the vice chair as per the bylaws and gotten approval to go ahead and apply for those grants. And now that we are meeting as a board, we need permission to accept those funds if awarded. And so I think I'll go through all of them quickly and see if we can then have just one vote, since it'll have to be a roll call vote. Is that acceptable to you, Chair?
It is. It's acceptable. Yes,
it is acceptable. Okay, thank you. So so I have 3 slides of these grants that will need some approval to accept. The first one is a continuation grant of money that comes from the CDC opioid project that provides some additional staff in our toxicology section, and that is in the amount of $164,807. The second one is the Coverdell Forensic Science Improvement Grant. This is a formula grant where funding is to Virginia for any kind of forensic science improvement. Virginia is actually allotted twice this value, but we split this funding evenly with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, since it's one of the few grants that they are eligible to receive. And so generally with this grant, we provide this funding, we use this to provide continuing education for all of our scientific staff that are non-DNA, because they have separate grant funds that are only allowed to be used for DNA, and we use that for their continuing education. The one additional thing that we put in that grant this time would be to hire a position that could help DFS with its expansion of our LIMS, or our Laboratory Information Management System, to have someone that would be kind of like our tracking system coordinator that could be available to assist law enforcement as we move to pre-log and the distribution of electronic certificates of analysis, because that, I think, is going to take a lot of background work. The third one, we have applied additionally from this Coverdell project. We've also applied for a competitive grant. I'm not sure what our odds are at getting this, but we applied anyway. And that would be to hire a forensic toxicologist trainee so that we could get someone in the door and trained through this 18-month training period to hopefully be able to increase the capacity of the toxicology section. Next, we have, excuse me, we have 2 research grants that we have applied for. We have been fairly successful in receiving these grants before, and generally we write into the grant a scientific position that will do the work so that we are not, in doing this research, we are not affecting our productivity too much in a negative manner. So the first is for toxicology research. We do have a toxicology PhD scientist that would oversee this work, and this will be to conduct research and develop a method for being able to identify and quantitate some of the different cannabinoids that are being marketed now in products, and being able to test those in biological matrices for both medical examiner samples and drivers. The second one is in firearms, and this is what I mentioned before, where we put in a research grant to purchase some more of those 3D imaging systems, and then we would use those to do a research project on whether or not what the benefits really are of doing blind verifications in the firearms and tool marks discipline, because once those images are taken with the 3D imaging system, it'll be a little bit more like that latent print system where you can just move the images from lab to lab and do those comparisons on the computer. We also applied through the Coronavirus Emergency Supplemental Funding, which is a program through DCJS. This may be one where Director Dion might need this one pulled out separately if she needs to abstain from the vote. But we had 2 projects that we put forward for using this funding, both of which are to help us be able to provide the breath alcohol services more electronically in case of continued pandemic, and some additional personal protective equipment and various supplies and software type things for assisting with remote training from the forensic training section as well. The next one is the continuation of that SACI grant that would allow for some additional testing to be done. That would be some additional familial testing, excuse me, up to 20 cases. Those are time consuming to perform, and so we needed to limit the number that we could do with a particular amount of funding, and continued employment for that perk tracking system coordinator. And then lastly, we have worked with DCJS to receive some JAG funding to continue the employment of our part-time instructor in the forensic training section. This will allow us to continue offering that 3rd session of the Forensic Science Academy and the additional short courses that we have been performing. And so, Chairman, that is the extent of all of the grants. And so I would appreciate it if the board could act.
Okay, one issue. Senator Dion. Dion, are you recusing yourself from this, or are you going forward with you?
Yes, sir, Mr. Lett. If I could recuse myself from the coronavirus emergency supplemental fund grant as well as the JAG grant.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay. Hang with me for just a moment. Okay.
And this is Katja. I'm going to do maybe the two DCGS related grants first. So the motion would be for the department to accept funds if awarded for the two DCGS related grants for the coronavirus one and the JAC grant that Director Jackson just described, which the chair and vice chair previously granted the department permission to apply for. If we could get a motion on the DCGS related grants.
The motion? Is there a motion for those two grants?
Les Edinburgh, so moved.
Dr. Gormley, second.
Any discussion? Taylor, would you take a vote, please?
Colonel DeBoer,
Yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Aye.
Senator Edwards,
Aye.
Dr. Gormley,
Aye.
Mr. Hayes,
Aye.
Ms. Howard,
Aye.
Ms. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Lett,
Yes.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Colonel Settle,
Aye.
Mr. Shaw, Wood,
Yes.
the motion holds.
And the next motion would be for the remaining 6 grants. So the motion would be for the department to accept funds if awarded for the remaining grants the director described, which the chair and vice previously granted the department permission to apply for.
This is Carl Hayes, so moved.
Gormley, second.
Colonel DeBoer,
Yes.
Director Dion,
Yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Aye.
Senator Edwards,
Aye.
Dr. Gormley, Mr. Hayes,
Aye.
Ms. Howard,
Aye.
Ms. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Lett,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Colonel Settle,
Aye.
Mr. Shaw, Mr.
Did we get a response?
No, I cannot.
Is he still with us? Is he muted? We're breaking up a little bit there. What was the last response, Ms. Taylor?
Mr. Shaw is who I'm waiting on.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry. Repeat that for me, please.
Can you hear me better?
That's a little better. What was the last
Mr.
response?
The last response was Colonel Settle approved. I'm waiting for Mr. Shaw to approve as well.
Okay, Mr. Shaw, are you with us? I think you're muted. Can you speak to us? Adjust your mic a little bit.
Who was muted, Mr. Litt?
There we are. Is that you?
No, this is Dave Barron. Who was muted?
Mr. Shaw, Ed Shaw.
Okay, he looks unmuted now.
Okay. What is his response? What's his vote? Mr. Shaw? Mr. Shaw? I think he's still.
Jennifer, you can just record it and not voting on this.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Ms. Wood,
Yes.
the motion passes.
Okay. All right, the motion's passed. Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Ms. Jackson,
Yes,
I think we're back to you.
all right. We'll try and finish up here. I did just want to kind of share with you the changes that we have had in case submissions this year versus last year. This is for quarter 2, which is the months of April, May, and June, which was when we saw the greatest reduction in the amount of cases that were submitted to us for testing. And have also allowed us to reduce our backlog pretty significantly in some of our sections. You can see that the difference in case submissions for controlled substances is about the biggest, in that we got about 2,000 less cases in 2020 than in 2019. That, coupled with the additional scientific staff that we have that are now qualified and able to do casework, we have managed to reduce the backlog from where it was at the end of June in 2019 of 12,000 cases down to just over 6,000 cases in 2020.
Yes, and I chatted with him privately, suggesting that you might reconnect.
So anyway, that has been hugely helpful. Obviously, we've done quite a lot in that time period with the outsourcing and multiple other elements. But it's great that we hope that we will not have to continue to outsource now that the backlog has been reduced to this level. The one other area that I wanted to point out is the lack of change in toxicology. It does seem that there's been a significant uprising in overdoses, and we have certainly considered, even with the reduction in the number of driving submissions that we have gotten, we haven't overall gotten less cases in toxicology because of the increase in medical examiner cases. So our turnaround times, this is an average of the cases that were completed in June. They are available on our website for anyone who is interested in obtaining that data. It gets updated every month on the 6th of the month once the numbers are solidified. And so in June, you can see that our drug turnaround time average is now at approximately 106 days. I will say that it is not the same all across the state. We are still trying to dig out of the backlog a little bit in the Northern lab, and so turnaround times in Northern are a little more than that. But we are transferring cases from Northern to the Central Laboratory to go ahead and try and help normalize the turnaround times in that section. Digital and multimedia evidence, that looks very high, and obviously it is very high at 312 days. We have some older cases that were not of a high priority that we are trying to go ahead and get worked. And so that number, when you work those really old cases, is inflated in that way. But we were trying to get rid of some of those old cases caught up. I'm not going to go through all of these statistics, but the backlog statistics that are that I report on each at each meeting are after this particular slide. It is by quarter, and so it shows the cases received in the quarter, how many were completed, and then the caseload is that backlog at the end of the quarter. And so that is available for your perusal for each of the sections. So you can see that even though, I will say about the digital and multimedia evidence, that although the turnaround times are not good in that they are quite long in the average, you can see that the backlog has been reducing, this green line, every quarter. And so looking through some of those older cases, and hopefully we'll catch up at some point. And then you can see that the backlog is rising in firearms and latent prints, as I was discussing previously, mostly due to some staffing vacancies and people in training. And so I appreciate, that was a long report. It's been, a lot going on in the past, since we met in January. And so I appreciate your attention, and I appreciate you for being here to support our agency. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments for Dr. Jackson? Director Jackson? None? Good presentation. It was lengthy, but we appreciate it, okay? It's been suggested that we take a 5-minute break. Everybody a couple of minutes, 5 minutes or so, we'll come back and we'll start again, okay? Thank you.
Ms. Taylor, would you like to test your audio feed?
Sure. Can you hear me better now?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Five minutes? Are we back on board?
Yes, sir, you are unmuted.
I think it's important that we take a roll call. Who's available? Ms. Taylor?
Yes, I'm getting ready to start with the roll.
Okay. take
Colonel
your time.
DeBoer. Colonel
I'm here.
DeBoer.
Yes, I'm here.
Director Dion.
I'm present.
Dr. Edinburgh. Dr. Edinburgh.
Here, sorry, the mute.
Thank you. Senator Edwards.
Yeah, yes. Sorry for the delay.
Thank you. Dr. Gormley.
I'm back.
Mr. Haid.
I'm here.
Ms. Howard.
Here.
Ms. Jurin.
Here.
Mr. Lett.
Here.
Mr. Myers.
Here.
Colonel Settle.
Here.
Mr. Shaw. Okay, I see your chat message. Thank you. Ms. Wood.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum, and I also want to note that Mr. Shaw voted through the chat feature for the permission to accept the DCGS grants. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Then we're going to move forward to the report from the Scientific Advisory Committee. Mr. Richard Myers.
All righty. So the report of the Scientific Advisory Committee, the Scientific Advisory Committee's Controlled Substances Subcommittee met electronically on Monday, July 13th. That committee reviewed validation documentation related to the differentiation of hemp and marijuana, as well as sample prep experiments pertaining to cannabinoid quantitation. The subcommittee also discussed 3 methods in development, and the Controlled Substances Subcommittee closed its review of the validation and methods in development. The Toxicology Subcommittee also met electronically on Monday, July 13th. The toxicology subcommittee reviewed validation documentation related to a variety of drugs and drug classes and automation. The subcommittee also discussed 4 methods in development, and the toxicology subcommittee closed its review of the validations and methods in development. The forensic biology subcommittee met electronically on Tuesday, July 14th, to discuss validation documentation for a Y chromosome DNA testing procedural modification and change in detection instruments. The subcommittee closed its review of the validation. The full scientific advisory committee also met yesterday after the forensic science biology subcommittee. The committee received and accepted reports from the controlled substances toxicology and forensic biology subcommittees. The committee elected me to serve as its new chair and elected Ms. Maureen Bottrell to serve as vice chair. The committee heard an agency update from Director Jackson, a technical services update from Ms. Alcaloman, and program area updates from the various program managers. An update on the hair review and field test regulations from Ms. Amy Jenkins, and a PERC tracking system overview from Ms. Madison Bowden. The committee also heard a presentation on the serology case review from Mr. Brad Jenkins, and the committee recommended that notifications be made in 5 cases if conviction information is confirmed in those cases, and that the case review be closed. I understand that Mr. Jenkins is going to present on the serology review to you next, so I'll let him provide the details to you for that. This concludes my scientific advisory committee reports.
Any questions or comments regarding Mr. Meyer's presentation? Hearing none, we'll move on to old business. And Mr. Brad Jenkins will present on the serology case review. Mr. Jenkins.
Mr. Jenkins will be up in just a second.
Okay.
Good morning. Mr. Chair, can you see my presentation?
No.
We'll try again. Hang on. Is that better?
Yes, that is better.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm Brad Jenkins. I'm the Forensic Biology Program Manager, and today we're going to talk about the review of serology cases. This has been a 4-year project for myself and scientists within this section. And so I'm going to start with a review of why we're doing this, and a review of what serology is in Virginia, what that looked like, to bring everybody kind of up to speed. Why we were doing this. In 1982, there was a rape homicide case down in the Norfolk area. ABO testing results were found in the file that appeared to eliminate the suspect. Those results were not reported in a certificate of analysis. There was a trial and there was a conviction. It seems that the main evidence in the case was bite mark evidence, and he was convicted. DNA testing the Innocence Project was involved in the case, and DNA testing was done by our department, and he was eliminated in 2016, and a pardon or writ of innocence, I forget which one, was afforded to him. There were a number of newspaper articles about this. The top one's New York Times. The second one, I think, is from Frank Green at the Times-Dispatch here in Richmond, and it talks about this specific case, and that the results were in a case file, sperm was found, and those reports were not reported, nor did it come out in testimony either. So what is serology testing at the Department of Forensic Science? We are a state crime lab system. We started in 1972 and we were accredited in 1989. Between 72 and 94, we did conventional serology testing, much like other labs in the United States and or crime labs in the United States. And this would involve ABO testing was the most common test that we did. Later on in this testing history, we brought on other enzyme type tests, protein tests. They're abbreviated PGM, PGM subtypes, PEPA for secretions and serum proteins, HP, GCTF for blood. And in 1994, the conventional serology testing was replaced with our beginnings of DNA testing. And conventional serology testing, it was not as discriminating as DNA testing. And so that's why us, as well as other labs in the states, migrated from serology testing to DNA testing. This is what conventional serology testing looked like in our case files. If you look in the right-hand corner, you can see that they're the abbreviations ABEL, absorption elution. That's a type of ABO testing that was done. At the top of the page, there are the item numbers. On the left side of the page, you can see there's some words written there: benzidine, phenolphthalein, and a precipitin test. Those were tests to help indicate the presence of blood, and you can see that they're marked with a positive sign. In about the middle of the page, there are some letters A, B, H, etc., and those would be the specific ABO testing results. Some red crosses, pluses you can see there. And then down at the bottom of the page, this was actually a case where once those items are tested, they're actually the swab or the stains were taped down into the case file. And so this was the birth of our post-conviction testing program. And there'll be a presentation, I think, Ms. Howard on that coming up a little later about the notification of that. But this is what that evidence looked like. And so the reviewers in the lab were looking at these types of worksheets. Not every case had taped down cuttings in them, but some of them did. Review of the case, and I've talked about this before, but we wanted to look at about 100 cases from 2 of our laboratories, or 100 reports from 2 labs. The Eastern lab, and that's where this issue first came up, so we figured we needed to look at cases from that laboratory. There were 101 cases that we reviewed that corresponded to 110 lab reports. In some cases, we'll have multiple lab reports. The Northern laboratory, there were 70 cases that were reviewed. This involved 103 lab reports. The Northern lab was one of our larger testing labs, as well as Central. And so the Northern lab was just simply picked because we had a larger number of examiners there compared to our Roanoke laboratory. The Central and Northern are very, very similar in testing number of analysts or number of scientists. We tried to capture a large range of scientists. 18 different scientists were captured in this review. We also looked at 15 post-conviction cases where we had done DNA testing. And we, one of our last meetings, we spoke about how we have prepared a letter to send out to our law enforcement partners, defense attorneys, and asked if they had any cases for us to review, and 3 cases were added by attorney request. Cases reviewed independently by 2 of our department scientists who were trained in conventional serology. At the beginning of the project, we had 4 examiners who were involved in the review. And so one examiner would do one review, and then the case would be sent off independently to the other examiner. 2 of those examiners have retired or moved on to other jobs. So now we have 2 of those original 4 examiners are still here. 20% of the review was done by an outside reviewer. This past year, an internal committee composed of myself and the two scientists who were originally qualified in this area re-reviewed all the cases and recommended cases for possible notification or further action. The cases that were identified were actually then sent to our external reviewer who reviewed our findings and decisions in those cases. 9 cases were sent for that review, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. What we're really looking for, and that top bullet point is, it was a very narrow view of these cases, and what we were trying to see is, was there potential exculpatory testing results in the notes but not reported in the certificate of analysis. Also, we wanted to make note if we had any masking in the case. Masking may be a situation where the victim and the suspect have the same ABO type, so it's hard. So the victim could mask the suspect's type or vice versa, depending on what piece of evidence you're looking at. Also, would we note any other unusual observations in the review that we found in these case files? Here are some of the general observations from these cases. There are no written conclusions comparing the results to reference samples until the late 1980s or near the end of serology testing. And so the reports would list the serology result or the ABO result from a stain on a shirt, say that person's a type A secretor from the blood stain on the shirt. And then the next item, it's say item 2, it's say that's the blood from the suspect. It would say that he's a type O secretor, but there would be no inner comparisons between the suspect sample and the evidence sample. That would be left for a verbal conclusion that would be made if the case went to trial and the examiner had to testify, or the readers of the report would have to make some of those conclusions, but there were no written conclusions. Very different from how we do things today. The next question would come up, if the evidence and the suspect have the same types, how common or how rare are those types in the population? And so there are no statistics in the reports. Some calculations are found in the notes. So again, that would be a verbal testimony issue to give information about how common or how rare those types are. Results for known reference samples are not reported when typing results or no typing results are taken for evidence samples. So basically, if we couldn't get a result from the vaginal swab, we may have gotten a result from the victim or the suspect standard, but we would not necessarily report those out because there's nothing to compare it to. The converse of that, or the reverse of that, is also true, that if we got results from the evidence, but we didn't have typing results from the reference samples, we would not necessarily report out the typing results from the evidence because we didn't have anything to compare it to. But what we were happy to find is in those cases, in the reports, it asked for reference samples from the various parties to be submitted for further comparisons to be conducted. So if we needed a sample from the victim, the report would actually say, submit a sample from so-and-so for additional comparisons, and that would be addressed in a subsequent report. Some body fluid screening results were recorded in the notes, but not reported. Most commonly, this is a test for saliva amylase. And so if you had a saliva sample from the victim as a known sample, that may be, that will be tested to confirm, hey, there is saliva there, but not necessarily reported. And so the body fluid testing results, depending on what was probative in the case, those were the results that would be probative or reported in the certificate of analysis. In a rape case, you would typically be looking for sperm. And so those sperm or semen results would be reported. You're not necessarily looking for blood in those types of cases. And so you might have some blood results that are not reported in those. A number of cases exhibited potential masking of results. That is not unusual. These types of blood markers are not necessarily that rare in the population. So having people have the same types is not unusual. And that's one of the reasons why the community as a whole moved away from ABO testing to more discriminating DNA testing, which is what we do today. So those are the general observations. And so now I have slides on each specific case. And all the slides have this typical format. Up in the upper left-hand corner will tell you what type of case it is. And then I tried to briefly say what the issue was in the case. And then in the body of the slide goes in a little bit more detail about each case. And so this first case is the one case we know that there was an actual conviction in this case. And the ABO typing results were changed, and it's a rape case. 3 reports were issued. The first report, there was a PERC submitted to the laboratory. That is a physical evidence recovery kit or a rape kit. And there was also some genes from the victim submitted. Sperm was identified a type A secretor was reported in that report. The suspect came in a later submission, and he was reported as a non-secretor in the second report. We had a communication from a doctor that the victim is type O that was written into the case file. And this doctor is not one of our staff members. And so it seems like this is a private doctor who wrote this information, or this information came from. The items were resubmitted, and in some cases there may be new items that were collected. But you can see that in the third, the genes type changed to an O secretor. The victim has changed that type to an O secretor from an A secretor, and now the suspect is an O secretor. No amended reports were done. There was a trial and a conviction. This information about the changing of the typing results over several reports was brought up in trial. This case actually had taped down evidence that I alluded to in one of my beginning slides, and post-conviction DNA testing was done, and the defendant was eliminated. And Virginia, the courts granted him a writ of actual innocence in this case. Cases 2 and 3, both are rape cases, and the issues with these are control issues. And so with our testing, and with our testing back then as well, we always test control samples. And this would be a negative control, positive control, it may be a substrate control as well. If these controls did not work or failed or gave unusual results, then the typing results associated with them, whether it be on evidence or reference samples, are typically termed inconclusive because the controls didn't work. And so that is a routine practice that's done by laboratories, and we were no different with that practice. Case number 2 involved vaginal swabs and genes that were inconclusive. So these were evidence samples that were inconclusive. It does appear there were some hair comparisons in the case, and hairs on the genes, the victim's genes, were consistent with the suspect. And case number 3, it was a suspect reference sample that was inconclusive. And so sperm was found in the victim PERC. There was an ABO test on the PERC, and able to get a type. And in the report, another suspect standard was requested. And so that's exactly what we'd expect to see. But again, so these cases 2 through 9, we don't know if any convictions were in these cases. So just keep that in mind. Case number 4 was a homicide case, and there's multiple control swabs for some of the items, and some of those control swabs tested positive for blood. And so current day reporting, we've just reported that some of the swabs tested positive or indicated a blood. Some of the other negative control swabs were actually negative. And in this report, it said no evidence of blood was reported on the control swabs. It really has no effect on the final typing in the case. And having a positive substrate control, an unusual finding when looking at these cases all those years ago, and we would encounter those very commonly. So this was not unusual. Case number 5 is a rape case, and there was a sheet that was involved in this case, and a number of stains on the sheet were also screened for saliva. The issue was that a number of the stains on the sheet also contained sperm, and sperm will interfere with that saliva test. And so the report read that no evidence of saliva was reported for all 10 stains, and one of those stains actually had sperm in it, so it should have been inconclusive for saliva. And so the report should have read no evidence of saliva was found in 9 of the stains. One of the stains was for saliva. In this case, it's interesting to note that we requested reference samples from the victim and the suspect, and it doesn't look like we had any reference samples ever submitted in this case for testing. So again, it's a rape case, and so the sperm would have been of primary interest for testing in this case. We asked for samples from the victim and suspect, and they were not submitted that we can tell. Case number 6 is a rape case, underreported result, but no victim sample for comparisons. And so there was no stains or no foreign body fluids could be found on the victim's underpants, but ABO testing was conducted anyway, and an A type was detected from her underpants. The suspect is a type O secretor. Samples from the victim were requested for further comparisons, and no samples were submitted that we can tell in the case review. Case number 7 looks to be a typo in the case. And so this is a robbery and an attempted rape case. There was a PGM type test done, and in the notes, that PGM result is a 2-1+. It was reported as a 2+1+ for a stain from the suspect's shirt. Both the victim and the suspect were eliminated from this stain, so it doesn't have any bearing. So make sure I'm clear, even if the correct type 2-1+ was reported, both the victim and suspect would still be eliminated from the stain on the suspect's shirt. This case was interrelated to other cases, and so all the additional reports that were issued in this case had the correct typing result for the shirt as 2-1+ reported. So although multiple reports were issued, that first case had a typo in it. And it had no bearing on the ultimate conclusion from the victim and suspect in that case, because they were both eliminated from it. Case number 7 is similar to case number 6 in that we had a rape case and some of the ABO results were not reported. The item was pants but it was negative for body fluids. No semen or blood was detected on the pants. In some of these instances, even though there are no body fluids, a sample from the crotch of the pants will be taken forward for ABO testing. An A secretor was detected, and 2 inconclusive results were also detected in other areas. Those were not reported. Both the victim and suspect in this case were A secretors. And so that was a practice that we did see, that you would have some typing results, but if you did not find body fluids or foreign body fluids on those items, those typing results may not be reported out. All right, our last case. This is a bit unusual, rape case, and the victim, female victim, got away from her attacker and then killed the perpetrator or killed the suspect in the case. The conclusion wording is just a little odd. The middle bullet talks about a thigh sample. No results were obtained for the thigh sample. And the statement that was in the report, since no types foreign to the victim were detected on the thigh sample, so the suspect could not be eliminated, nor could the victim. Basically, if you have no types from a sample, you can't eliminate anybody. Also, in 29 and 36, there were no typing results for stains on a comforter, and both the victim and suspect were not eliminated. I mean, that's the statement. In the end of the day, the statement's correct that they were not eliminated. But like I said, you couldn't eliminate anybody from those stains if you don't have a typing result, obviously. Today, we would word that no typing results were obtained, therefore no conclusions regarding this person can be made. And so it's just, I haven't seen that wording before, so we've tried to flag it for that unusual wording. Case recommendations. We thought notification was warranted in 6 of the cases, 2, 3, 6, 8, and 9. Case number 1 also would have been in the notification pile, but post-conviction DNA testing was already done on that case. A writ of actual innocence was actually issued by the Supreme Court, so there's no further notification needed. And like I said, that information came out of the different typing results came out at trial. Notification was not recommended in the remaining 3 cases, 4, 5, and 7. We went through this presentation yesterday, and this was approved by the Scientific Advisory Committee yesterday, or these recommendations were. Further information is that based on the current review, no duplication of the issue was observed in the Harvard case, and no identification of other isolated or systemic issues that would warrant continued review of additional cases. No further reviews are recommended. And again, this was sent to the advisory board committee, scientific advisory committee, and approved yesterday. I mean, the cases that I have gone over today, it's just in an abundance of caution. We would like to recommend notification in those cases. We agree with many of the reports on how they are written, but just in today's atmosphere and abundance of caution, if you saw issue with those cases, we would recommend notification. Final thoughts. We have been a big post-conviction testing state for DNA testing for a number of years. And so due to the limitations of serology, this is an area where the General Assembly has, since 2001, provided for post-conviction DNA testing and mechanisms for writs of actual innocence when DNA testing has eliminated a convicted individual. Second bullet there, we have completed one of the largest post-conviction testing programs in the country. Over 800 cases were tested. In all those cases, serology testing was done in those cases as well. And lastly, this has been a service that we have offered, and we would continue in this with these types of cases as well, that we will continue to offer reviews upon request on a case-by-case basis when conviction information has been confirmed. And I believe that is all I have at this point. Are there any questions that I can try to answer from the group?
No questions at all? Any discussion?
Thank you.
Any discussion about anything we just heard? Motion. Can we have a motion to approve the recommendations of the Scientific Advisory Committee that notifications be made if conviction information is confirmed? Cases 2, 3, 6, 8, and 9, and that no further reviews are recommended, so the review can be closed. Is there such a motion?
John, it was so moved.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Was that a motion? I'll read this again. Is there a motion to approve the recommendations?
Yeah, John Edwards, I move the recommendation.
Okay. Second,
Kristen Howard, second the motion.
did we get a count? Roll call vote. Ms. Taylor?
Colonel DeBoer,
Yes.
Director Dion,
Yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Aye.
Senator Edwards,
Aye.
Dr. Gormley,
Aye.
Mr. Haid,
Aye.
Ms. Howard,
Aye.
Ms. Jurin,
Aye.
Mr. Lett,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Colonel Settle, Colonel Settle,
Aye.
thank you. Mr. Shaw, you can notify me through the chat feature if you can't talk. Thank you. Ms. Wood,
Yes.
the motion passes.
Thank you. Now we'll call on Kristen Howard to report on the post-conviction testing and notification project.
Good morning, everyone. This is Kristen Howard, Executive Director of the Virginia State Crime Commission, and probably will be giving my last report of this project. I know you've been excited to hear from me for the last 10 years at every single board meeting, but I think this is the end of the project. So just a quick recap. If you recall, at the October 3rd board meeting, you all voted unanimously that all reasonable efforts have been made to notify the convicted individuals once we make those last notification efforts of those two groups with the misdemeanors and the ineligible cases. At the January meeting, we advised the board that we had completed all of the misdemeanor notifications, and then we're moving on to work on the ineligible cases. So since January, we have been working to complete that task. And since then, we have made all of those notifications for those ineligible convictions. We identified 289 individuals who were eligible for notification. Of those, 56 were successfully notified, 88 were determined to be deceased, and all leads were exhausted for the remaining 145 individuals. And as far as the testing components go, as of last month, no request had been made for DNA testing for these eligible individuals. So with great excitement, the Crime Commission published its annual report last month, and we included a very detailed description of the entire project with all of the data and information. And you are more than welcome to check that out. It's posted on our website if you need some light reading. It's several, it's a long report, but if you'd like to have an in-depth overview, it is there for your taking. So I just want to thank DFS and the board for continuing to support the project and for all the hard work. DFS was incredible to work with. They were a great partner. We also utilize the services of so many other groups and organizations, and it's exciting to see this come to an end. We have 13 exonerations that were as a result of this entire project. So it's been a long project, but it's been very worthwhile in the end. So unless there are any questions or I can provide any additional details, I think this is my last report for the DNA notification project.
Thank you so much. Any questions or comments? All right, then we'll move on to Ms. Jenkins. Give us an update on the microscopic hair comparison case review.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Good morning. I am Amy Jenkins. I am counsel for the Department of Forensic Science. I'll provide just a very brief overview of the microscopic hair comparison case review for the new members. This review was started by the board in 2016, and it was a result of a notification received by the FBI that some of our microscopic hair comparison examiners had by the FBI, and there were concerns from an FBI review of their cases that some hair examiners may have overstated their testimony. And gone beyond the science, what the science supported in testifying as to microscopic hair comparisons in the day. We began this with an overview from our cases that we had gathered and were provided. In addition, the Historic Case File Project is a group of wage employees that are going through and are scanning the certificates of analysis of the 1 million plus archive case files that we have at the State Records Center. And as they see a microscopic hair comparison certificate of analysis, they're making a determination on whether it's a positive probative association. And if so, they are providing those positive probative associations to our legal assistant at the department, Jess Norton. She is taking that information and attempting to obtain from the circuit court clerks conviction information for those positive probative associations. And if we determine there's been a conviction, we attempt to obtain a transcript because the review is of the testimony provided by that examiner during the course of the trial. This is an ongoing project. Unlike Ms. Howard, and I will be making reports to you for the rest of my career, probably here at DFS. We have about 100 letters that are either have been sent out since the January meeting of the board to the circuit court clerks to obtain conviction information and transcripts, or are on their way out the door. We were able since January to pull together 9 transcripts. The team met on June 5th to review those 9 transcripts and make recommendations regarding notification. What we need to do next with this group is to have a meeting of the microscopic hair comparison subcommittee to have those recommendations of the review team considered and a final determination on notifications for those 9 transcripts. Currently, we are short a subcommittee member with Vince Donahue no longer being on the board. We do have 2 subcommittee members right now. Mr. Lett and Lieutenant Colonel Rosillo sits for Colonel Settle on that subcommittee. We could use a 3rd member so that we don't have any kind of tie vote issues. So I would ask board members to consider whether or not they would be willing to serve in that capacity. The subcommittee typically only meets once a year, maybe twice a year, and reviews about 10 transcripts. And the transcripts are not of the entire trial, but are just of the examiner's testimony, which is normally somewhere between 30 to 40 pages at the most. So if we had someone that would consider sitting in that capacity, I would appreciate them letting Mr. Lett or myself know, or Mr. Lett will likely have to volunteer someone for that service. So I appreciate that, and I have no other report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to new business. Katja Herndon, legislative update. And with this forward.
All right, can everybody hear me and see my screen?
Yes, Katja, I can see your screen and I can hear you.
Great. Thank you. Before I get started on my legislative update, I wanted to start by just saying thank you to Kristen Howard and all of the staff at the Crime Commission, and in particular, Christina Arrington, who really did kind of all the heavy lifting for the full file review over the last
several years now, and without whom we wouldn't be where we are today with the post-conviction project. We wouldn't be done with it. So I wanted to, again, express our thanks to Kristen and her staff, and in particular, Kristen, if you could please express our sincere appreciation to Dr. Arrington for all of her hard work for us to be able to close out this project.
Thank you, Katja. I will definitely pass that along. She will definitely appreciate it. It's been a big priority for us. And so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So for our legislative update for the 2020 session, we had 2 agency bills. The DNA Databank Arrestee Law Clarification Bill, which was carried by Delegate Jenkins, and our tetrahydrocannabinol or THC concentration bill, which was carried by Senator Surraville. The DNA Arrestee Law Clarification Bill makes a technical correction that was overlooked when the DNA Databank statute was amended to add misdemeanors to the list of offenses requiring a person to be sampled upon conviction. The bill amends the arrestee law to delete the word felony. The arrestee law requires the department to destroy the arrestee's sample and associated records if the arrestee charge is dismissed or if the arrestee is acquitted, provided there is no other pending qualifying arrest or felony conviction that would otherwise require that it remain in the databank. Again, the bill strikes the word felony from that phrase, and the result is that the DNA databank is able to retain the sample in any case where the arrestee charge is dismissed or the arrestee is acquitted if the person has been convicted of any qualifying offense, including a qualifying misdemeanor offense. So Linda already covered our THC concentration bill during her presentation, so I'm not going to go through that bill again here. I wanted to cover some other bills of interest to our agency. The marijuana decriminalization bill is another one that Linda covered, so I'm not going to go through it. There were Board of Pharmacy scheduling bills. They were carried by Delegate Hodges and Senator Newman. These companion bills permanently add to the code those compounds that the department identified and that were temporarily scheduled via regulation by the Board of Pharmacy. Delegate Hope carried a bill that permits an indigent defendant who is charged with a felony or any class 1 misdemeanor or that defendant's attorney to request ex parte the appointment of an expert to assist in the preparation of the defense. After conducting an ex parte hearing, the court is to order the appointment of an expert if the defense shows that the expert will materially assist in preparing the defense and that the denial of expert services would result in a fundamentally unfair trial. The bill provides that the judge shall direct requests for scientific investigations to the department or to the Division of Consolidated Laboratory Services whenever practicable. Senator Morrissey patroned a bill that allows the attorney of record in a criminal case to issue subpoenas ducis tecum. The requirements to notify opposing counsel, certify that the records are material, and return records to the clerk of court still remain. The bill required the executive secretary's office to create a form for attorneys to use for these SDTs. And I checked, and the newly created, its form DC 3000 is now available on the court's website. Delegate Warren carried a bill that would have codified the Supreme Court rules on discovery. The court had delayed the effective date of its discovery rules until July 1, 2020 at the request of the Commonwealth's attorneys. The bill's enactment clause provided that it would go into effect on July 1 if the Supreme Court rules did not go into effect on that date. So the General Assembly passed the bill to ensure that there would be new discovery rules in place on July 1. The court's rules did go into effect on July 1, so the bill did not. Although the bill didn't go into effect, the rule did, and I did want to just talk briefly about the new discovery rules. The rules address discovery for felonies in circuit court and misdemeanors that are brought on direct indictment. Rule 3A11 requires the Commonwealth's attorney to notify the accused in writing when it intends to introduce expert opinion testimony at trial or sentencing, and it requires the Commonwealth's attorney to provide the accused with 2 different things. First, any written report of the expert witness setting forth the witness's opinions and the basis and reasons for those opinions, or if there is no such report, to provide a written summary of the expected expert testimony, setting forth the person's opinions and the basis and reasons for those opinions, and also to provide the witness's qualifications and contact information. The rule specifies that providing a copy of a certificate of analysis from the Department of Forensic Science signed by the person performing the analysis or examination satisfies those two requirements. So how does this affect us? Well, our certificates of analysis satisfy the requirement for expert witness notification. That provision has actually been included in the draft discovery rules back from the very beginning when they were discussed by Judge Humphreys on the committee that he had studying the rules. It's been now several years ago. And our department counsel, Amy Jenkins, attended all of the committee meetings to make sure that language stayed in the proposed rules to limit the impact on our agency. One area where we may have an issue is for our toxicologists who may be called upon to provide expert testimony in cases when they did not issue a report. For example, in a DUI case, when they're called to interpret results involving a hospital blood test, or even in cases where they issued a report, but their report just provides the level of drugs or alcohol that were identified in the individual's blood, and the report does not provide their opinion regarding potential impairment. In those cases, our thought is that the toxicologist would have a conversation with the Commonwealth's attorney in advance, and the Commonwealth's attorney would have to provide a written summary of that to the defense. So our two new members, Delegate Herring and Senator Edwards, carried bills that expand writs of actual innocence. Now, persons convicted or adjudicated delinquent of any felony, regardless of their plea, may request a writ. The burden of proof is reduced from clear and convincing evidence to a preponderance of the evidence. And the bill makes two additional changes for non-biological writs. First, they remove the prior restriction that had only allowed a person to file one writ per case. And second, the petitioner used to have to show the evidence was previously unknown or unavailable. These bills create an alternative. The petitioner now instead test procedure was not available at the time of conviction. And then the final bill I want to discuss is one that Senator Norman introduced. It was a bill in response to the Supreme Court of Virginia's opinion in the In re Sherman Brown case. In that case, Brown had post-conviction DNA testing conducted by a private laboratory, and he sought a writ of actual innocence based upon the private lab's test results. The Supreme Court dismissed Brown's petition, and in doing so, noted that the statute governing post-conviction DNA testing requires the test results to come from DFS, and that the court does not have the authority to go outside of that statutory scheme. So the bill amends the statute to specifically allow private laboratories to conduct post-conviction testing under the statute, and to be eligible to conduct the testing under the statute, the private laboratory must be accredited and must follow the FBI's quality assurance standards. So that concludes my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Any comment? Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is public comment. Any member of the public want to comment? Have a comment? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is to confirm our future meeting date. October the 15th at 9:30 a.m. October the 15th at 9:30 a.m. 2020. That's our next meeting date. Any questions about that? Any comment? Then I think it's time to adjourn. It's been a lengthy meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Edinburgh, so moved.
Second?
Carl Hayes, second.
Ms. Taylor, would you take a roll call vote, please?
Director Dion?
Aye.
Dr. Edinburgh?
Aye.
Senator Edwards?
Aye.
Dr. Gormley?
Oh, yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Aye.
Ms. Howard?
Aye.
Ms. Jurin?
Aye.
Mr. Lett?
Aye.
Mr. Myers?
Aye.
Colonel Settle,
Aye.
Mr. Shaw, you can just write in the chat. Thank you. Ms. Wood,
Yes.
the motion passes.
Thank you so much. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.